Sometimes the first crack in love doesn't sound like thunder. It begins with a small sound, a word, a sneer, a sentence that makes the air in the room colder than it should be. The dining room smelled of lavender spray and overcooked pot roast, Barbara's signature scent of denial. Her birthday banner, crooked above the china cabinet, read, "Happy 72nd, Queen of the Family." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Barbara sat at the head of the table, pearls heavy on her wrinkled neck, like trophies from war's long one. Her son, my husband Dennis, was refilling her wine glass. I could tell by the angle of his shoulders that he was tense, already bracing for something. Barbara's words always came dipped in sugar but cut like glass. "Janet," she said, swirling her wine as if it held her reflection, "you'll never be as good as Anna." The words floated across the table and landed like ice water in my lap. The clinking of silverware stopped. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. Anna, the ghost of every dinner, the invisible guest of every conversation. Anna, the ex-lover, the paragon of grace, charity, and eternal comparison. I'd been married to Dennis for 3 years, yet I'd spent all of them competing with a woman who wasn't even in the room. Barbara smiled, satisfied with the silence she'd summoned. She had class, you know. Grace. She understood Dennis in ways. She paused, letting her words linger like perfume. Ways you just don't. My pulse stayed steady. Years in corporate boardrooms had taught me how to hold composure when provoked. But tonight, something in her tone, that condescending tilt, that cruel nostalgia, scraped against a part of me I'd kept patient for too long. I set down my fork and folded my napkin with care. "Then," I said, my voice even, "you should tell Anna to pay all your bills. I'm done funding your lifestyle." The effect was instantaneous. Barbara froze mid-breath, her painted smile faltering. "What did you say?" The others blinked, Dennis, his sister Melissa, his father Robert, as if the script had suddenly gone off course. The queen of the family had finally been spoken to like a woman, not a monarch. I leaned back, calm but unyielding. I said, "If Anna's the standard, maybe she can handle the invoices I've been covering." Barbara laughed nervously. "Oh, Janet, always joking." Robert shifted in his seat. "Invoices?" he repeated quietly. He looked genuinely puzzled. My stomach tightened. "You know, the monthly transfers," I said, turning to him. "For your medication, Barbara's arthritis treatments, the roof repair." Barbara blinked. "What money, dear? We never got a single dollar from you." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't from shock, it was from fear. Because in that instant, I saw Dennis's expression change. It wasn't confusion. It was recognition. He looked down, not at me, but at the tablecloth, tracing the embroidered flowers as if they might give him an escape route. That's when I knew something was wrong. Terribly wrong. When betrayal begins, it doesn't always come in the form of an affair or a secret text message. Sometimes it starts with numbers that don't add up. And in that moment, between Barbara's denial and Dennis's silence, I felt the weight of a truth too heavy to name. Robert was the first to speak. "Barbara, she's been helping us." His voice trembled, more from age than anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" Barbara's lips parted, then closed again. She looked truly bewildered. "Because there's nothing to tell," she said. "Dennis, what is she talking about?" Dennis swallowed hard. "Mom," he began, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "Maybe we should talk about this later." "No," I said, quietly but firmly. "We'll talk about it now." I'd spent years handling crises for corporate clients, multi-million-dollar discrepancies, audit fires, CEOs who swore the numbers were wrong until the math proved otherwise. But I never imagined I'd find myself conducting an audit at my own dinner table. I turned to Dennis. "Where has the money been going?" He stared at me, his face a portrait of panic wrapped in politeness. "Janet, let's not ruin Mom's birthday." "Ruin it?" I repeated. "I think your mother's doing a fine job of that herself." Barbara gasped. "How dare you?" "How dare I?" I leaned forward, voice low but steady. I've been sending money every month, 2,000 here, 2,500 there to help with your supposed medical costs. And now you tell me you've never received a cent." Melissa set down her fork. "Wait, what money?" she asked. "Dennis said your firm was investing in—" "Melissa," Dennis snapped, "stay out of it." But it was too late. The confusion had already turned into something else, suspicion, thick and suffocating. I looked at Dennis again, really looked at him. The man I married, kind eyes, quick wit, the one who danced with me in the kitchen, now sat in front of me like a stranger caught between two loyalties, the woman he married and the mother who never approved of her. Barbara broke the silence, her voice trembling. "If this is some kind of accusation—" "It's not," I said. "It's an accounting." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air buzzed with the low hum of Barbara's old refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. It was surreal how ordinary the world remained while mine began to tilt. Dennis reached for my hand, his fingers cold. "We'll sort this out later," he whispered. I pulled away. "Yes," I said, "we will." When I left that night, the rain had just begun. Queens always smelled different when it rained: damp concrete, exhaust, and something faintly metallic. Like old coins. Dennis walked me to the car, his steps quick, anxious. "You didn't have to say that in front of them," he murmured. "I didn't have to," I said, unlocking the car door. "But I did." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's complicated." "Then make it simple," I said. "Where's the money, Dennis?" He didn't answer. Just stared at the puddle forming near the curb, his reflection warping in the water. And in that distorted reflection, I saw it, the first glimpse of the man behind the mask. That night, long after he'd fallen asleep beside me, I lay awake replaying every moment. Every transfer, every thank you text, every excuse about why his parents couldn't thank me themselves. Barbara's confused face haunted me. Her denial hadn't looked rehearsed. It had looked real. So where had the money gone? The question pulsed in my mind like a heartbeat, rhythmic and relentless. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, my world, my marriage, my trust, my certainty began to fracture, quietly like the first crack in glass. And I realized something chilling. I'd spent years catching financial fraud for a living, but I'd never once thought to check my own home. It's funny how silence can become an alarm. The morning after Barbara's birthday, our house felt too quiet, not peaceful, but hollow. The kind of quiet that follows a truth no one wants to face. Dennis moved around the kitchen with the calm precision of a man pretending everything was fine. I watched him pour coffee, butter toast, and hum an old jazz tune as if the night before had never happened. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. His lips were warm, his tone casual. It was his favorite performance, the doting husband. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, though I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Barbara's face, not angry, but genuinely confused. I'd replayed it 100 times. "What money? We never got a single dollar from you." The words refused to fade. Dennis reached for his laptop on the counter, the same laptop that until recently had always sat open. Now it was locked behind a password. "Big client call today," he said. "Confidential stuff." I smiled faintly. "Of course." The smile didn't reach my eyes, but he didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. As the garage door closed behind him, the silence came back, heavier this time. I stared at the kitchen table, the same place where he'd once written me love notes, the same table where we'd planned vacations, budgets, a future. Now it looked like a crime scene missing only the chalk outlines. At work, my assistant Sarah greeted me with her usual cheer. "Morning, boss. The Henderson report's on your desk. Also, the CFO wants to review the irregularities in the portfolio tracking." "Of course he does," I said automatically, my professional autopilot kicking in. Numbers, spreadsheets, order, these were things I could control. But as I sat at my desk, the rows and columns blurred. My mind kept circling back to one column in particular, the transfers I'd labeled family support. 18 months, $42,000. Every payment had a note: mom's arthritis, dad's medication, roof repairs. Each label had felt comforting at the time, a tidy explanation. Now they looked like evidence. The irony wasn't lost on me. I made my living finding financial inconsistencies for others, tracking missing decimals that could expose millions in fraud. Yet somehow, I'd missed the biggest discrepancy of all, my own. I opened my personal spreadsheet, the one I'd designed to monitor household expenses. The data was neat: color-coded transfers in green, bills in blue, savings in gray. But something didn't add up. Our household spending had increased by 20% in the last year, yet Dennis's consulting income had flatlined. I clicked through the months, feeling the unease grow. There it was, the same recurring transfer, like clockwork, to Dennis's personal account. Every month, $2,000 to $2,500. I'd stopped questioning it long ago because love is the best disguise for neglect. My phone buzzed, a text from Dennis. Lunch later? I typed back, busy, maybe another day. I didn't add a heart emoji. That night I tried again. Dennis, I said as he scrolled through his phone on the couch, I was thinking we should review our accounts this weekend, just to get organized before tax season. He didn't look up. Already handled. I found a new system online, way better than the old one. Oh, can I see? He hesitated. It was subtle, a flicker of hesitation so small most people would have missed it, but I'd spent my career noticing the barely perceptible. Nothing exciting, he said lightly. Just spreadsheets and receipts, you'd be bored. Try me. He smiled, that same charming smile that had once disarmed me. You trust me, don't you? There it was, the trap wrapped in tenderness. You trust me, don't you? I nodded, because what else could I do? But later that night, while he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and thought about trust. It was like compound interest, beautiful when it grows, destructive when it collapses. The next few weeks passed in a strange blur of normalcy. Barbara called to thank me for a birthday gift I hadn't bought. Melissa sent a photo of her dog wearing a ridiculous sweater. Life seemed to steady itself, pretending nothing was wrong. But numbers don't lie, people do. The small things started to show. Dennis began locking his phone. He started taking calls in the garage, claiming poor reception. Bank statements stopped arriving in the mail. One evening, as I loaded the dishwasher, I heard the faint hum of his voice through the garage door. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone, soft, careful, almost tender. I froze, a plate still in my hand. The tone wasn't how a husband spoke to a client, and when he came back in, his smile was practiced, his excuses rehearsed. Client drama, he said. New contract negotiations. Must be stressful, I replied. He exhaled dramatically, the way people do when they want you to stop asking questions. You have no idea. I didn't, not yet. The moment of clarity came the following Sunday. Dennis had gone for his usual networking brunch, and I sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop. For once, I wasn't analyzing anyone else's portfolio, I was analyzing mine. It began innocently enough, a simple reconciliation of our joint account. But the deeper I went, the stranger it looked. Each transfer to Dennis's personal account was followed within days by withdrawals to different names, one of which I recognized, Anna L. My breath caught. It couldn't be. Surely it was another Anna, a coincidence, a shared name, but coincidences don't repeat monthly. I stared at the screen, tracing the pattern like an investigator connecting red strings on a corkboard. Every payment I'd made for Barbara's treatment was followed by an outflow to AL. Same week, same amount. It wasn't proof yet, but it was close enough to make my pulse thrum in my ears. I shut the laptop, my hands trembling. Outside, a windstorm rattled the windows. Inside, my certainty began to shake just as violently. When Dennis came home, he was whistling, cheerful, too cheerful. He kissed my temple and set down a box of pastries. "From that new French place you love." "Thanks," I murmured. I didn't eat any. He didn't notice the tremor in my voice when I said, "Did you see your mom today?" "Just called her," he replied, grabbing a pastry. "She's fine." "She mentioned anything about money lately?" He froze for a second, powdered sugar suspended midair. "Money?" he repeated. "Yeah, bills, medication, anything like that." He forced a laugh. "Always about money with you, huh?" My stomach clenched. It wasn't the words, it was the tone, defensive, mocking, like I'd become the problem for asking the question. "I just want to make sure they are okay," I said softly. "They're fine," he snapped. Then, as if realizing how sharp he sounded, he added, "Babe, really, it's under control. Don't stress about it." But I was already past stress. I was in calculation mode. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay awake listening to the soft rhythm of Dennis's breathing beside me. The sound that once soothed me now felt alien, almost deceitful. In the faint glow from the streetlight outside, I watched the shadows move across our ceiling. The mind is cruel in the dark. It replays every warning sign you ignored, every small decision that led you here. I thought about the first time Dennis had asked for money, how gentle his request had been, how easily I'd said yes. I thought about the laughter of his family, the way Barbara's eyes softened whenever Dennis entered the room, and how that same gaze hardened when it turned toward me. Then, as the hours passed, a single thought crystallized with painful clarity. If the money never went to his parents, where did it go? And more importantly, why did he lie? By dawn, I had made up my mind. If Dennis could keep secrets, so could I. It was time to start my own investigation, not as his wife, but as the woman who spent her life uncovering fraud. And this time, the client was me. There's a kind of quiet that lives in betrayal. It isn't the silence of peace or rest, it's the silence of a house that's still standing after the storm has already passed through, the air heavy with what's missing. That was our house now. Dennis left early that morning, claiming he had a client meeting in Manhattan. He kissed my forehead and said, "Don't wait up." The door closed, and his footsteps faded down the driveway. For a long time, I just stood there, watching the window. I didn't move until the car disappeared around the corner. I told myself I was just going to organize paperwork. That's what I do when I'm anxious. I tidy, I categorize, I make chaos look like order. But even as I walked to his home office, my heartbeat had already betrayed my intentions. Because this wasn't about order. It was about truth. The laptop sat on his desk, the same silver MacBook I'd once bought for him as an anniversary gift. I remembered how happy he'd been when I gave it to him. "You believe in me," he'd said, his eyes bright. At the time, I did. God, I really did. Now I stared at it like it was a vault holding my sanity hostage. I pressed the power button. The screen glowed to life, and of course the password prompt appeared. I tried the obvious first, our wedding date, his birthday, our street address. Nothing. I tried Barbara 1952 out of bitter irony. Still nothing. The cursor blinked at me, smugly patient. I sat back, exhaling. My mind was spinning, running through combinations of numbers and names, the people that mattered to him. Then, like a cruel whisper, a thought surfaced, Anna. My fingers hovered over the keys. It was ridiculous, wasn't it? Too obvious, too sentimental, but I typed it anyway. ANNA. Then, for no reason I could explain, I added 2020. The screen unlocked. For a moment, I just stared, frozen. The air left my lungs. It was like walking into a room you thought was empty and realizing someone had been living there all along. His desktop was a mess, folders everywhere, screenshots, old invoices. But one folder caught my eye, Family Finances. I clicked it open. Inside were spreadsheets, PDF, and a document titled Operation Keep Anna Afloat. I blinked, My brain didn't want to register the words. Operation what? I opened it. Rows and rows of entries filled the screen. Each column had neat headings. Date, amount received from J, actual distribution. Cover story told. J, that was me. Janet, the entries began a year and a half ago. $2,000 received told J for mom's medication. Sent $1, $500 to Anna. $2, $300 told J for roof repair. Used for Anna's boutique debt. $2, $500 told J for dad's medication. Split between Anna and Kyle. The color drained from my face. Each line was another knife, precise and deliberate. Every story Dennis had told me, every worried sigh, every mom doesn't want to ask you directly, all of it cataloged here next to the money I'd sent. I scrolled further down. $8,000 total to Kyle for investment recovery. $12,000 to Anna boutique expenses. Dennis admin fee $7,000 for managing operation. Admin fee. He'd paid himself to steal from me. For a moment, I couldn't move. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the laptop fan and the rush of my own heartbeat in my ears. I'd spent years auditing fraudulent accounts, tracing theft buried beneath numbers and excuses. Now I was staring at one built by the man I loved. His email was open in another tab. It shouldn't have been, but it was. I clicked through the inbox, then the sent folder. Messages between Dennis and Barbara, hundreds of them, dating back almost 2 years. Tell her it's for arthritis, she won't question medical stuff. She'll send it Monday, say thank you, make it emotional. Keep her busy with work. The less she looks at accounts, the better. I scrolled and scrolled, the words blurring into a pattern of lies and strategy. They hadn't just deceived me, they'd studied me. Each email felt like a page from a manual titled How to Manipulate Janet Whitmore. And Dennis, my husband, my partner, was the star pupil. My hands shook. I wanted to scream, to throw the laptop against the wall, but I didn't, because rage doesn't build proof, it destroys it. Instead, I took my phone and began taking pictures. Screenshots of the spreadsheet, emails, dates, amounts, every line of text that showed just how thoroughly I'd been played. By the time I finished, my camera roll looked like a crime file. Then I saw something that froze me even more. An email thread between Dennis and Anna. It wasn't romantic. That almost made it worse. It was transactional. Cold. This month's payment delayed, Jay's asking more questions. Keep calm, and her reply. Understood, grateful for your help. Tell your trust fund manager I appreciate the support. Trust fund manager. I stared at those words until they blurred. He told her I was his trust fund manager. He told his ex that the money came from some family inheritance, not from me. The insult was almost elegant in its cruelty. Upstairs, I heard the shower running. He must have come home early. I had minutes, maybe less. I forwarded everything to my private email account, the one Dennis didn't know existed. 23 emails, 14 attachments, one spreadsheet. Then I printed the files, page after page of betrayal spitting out of the printer like confessions. I slid the papers into my work folder just as the water stopped upstairs. By the time Dennis came down, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, reading the news on my tablet. "Morning," I said casually. "Hey," he replied, toweling his hair. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep." He kissed the top of my head. "You worry too much." "I guess I do," I said. He smiled, that same smile that once meant comfort and now meant camouflage. If he noticed that my hands didn't tremble, that my eyes no longer softened, he said nothing. That afternoon, I called Lisa. Lisa had been my college roommate, now a paralegal who specialized in financial crimes. When she picked up, I didn't even bother with hello. "Lisa," I said, my voice trembling, "I think my husband and his family have been stealing from me." There was silence, then a sharp inhale. Come over now. Her apartment was filled with the smell of coffee and printer toner. I handed her the folder. She flipped through the pages slowly at first, then faster. Janet, she said finally, this isn't just theft. This is wire fraud. They conspired. They used electronic transfers under false pretenses. That's federal. Federal? The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. They could all go to prison, she said quietly. You have every piece of evidence a prosecutor would need. I stared at the papers. My name, J, repeated over and over again in Dennis's handwriting. It looked foreign, like a character in someone else's tragedy. Lisa leaned forward. Don't confront them yet. Don't warn them. The moment they know, they'll start deleting evidence, coordinating stories. You wait, you plan. Her words were calm, measured, the voice of someone who'd seen the aftermath of deceit before. I nodded, numb. Then I said something I hadn't planned. Barbara's birthday dinner was yesterday, I whispered. The whole family was there. Maybe that's how it ends, at the same table where it started. Lisa's eyes narrowed, part admiration, part concern. Public confrontation, witnesses, smart. She paused. But Janet, once you do this, there's no going back. Your marriage, your job, your name, everything changes. I looked down at the papers, at the numbers, the lies, the strategy behind my back, everything already had. I met her gaze and said, then it's time they change too. When I drove home that evening, the sky was pink and bruised. I passed by the florist near our house and caught the smell of lilies, the same flowers I'd brought Barbara every weekend, the ones she never thanked me for. It struck me how small gestures can hide such enormous deceit. How love, in the wrong hands, becomes just another currency. When I parked in the driveway, Dennis's car was there. The porch light glowed. From the outside, our house still looked perfect, neat lawn, painted door, warm light through the curtains. But I knew now what perfection cost, and I wasn't paying anymore. There's a moment before every confrontation when the world seems to hold its breath. The light looks different. The air feels thick. Every sound, the ticking of a clock, the hum of a refrigerator becomes sharper, like the world is bracing for impact. That's how the morning of Barbara's birthday dinner felt. Not like a celebration, but like a verdict waiting to be read. Dennis was in the living room, humming as he adjusted his tie. He looked handsome, polished, effortlessly composed, the same way he'd looked the first time I met him at that financial seminar in Boston. If I hadn't known what I knew, I might have mistaken the man standing there for the one I'd fallen in love with. He caught me watching him in the mirror. You look beautiful, he said softly. Mom doesn't deserve you at her party. There was irony in his tone, but also guilt, the kind of guilt that hides behind a smile. I slipped on my coat, glancing once more at my purse. Inside were the papers Lisa had helped me organize, printed emails, the spreadsheet, the evidence that could shatter the Whitmore family. I carried them like armor. Ready? He asked. I've never been more ready, I said. The drive to Queens was quiet. The wipers brushed against the windshield rhythmically, clearing the drizzle that had started to fall. Dennis filled the silence with stories about work, imaginary clients, new contracts, the big deal that was supposedly closing next month. His voice was light, confident. It struck me then how easily he lied, how smoothly deception had become his native tongue. When we reached the building, he turned off the ignition and exhaled. Let's just have a nice evening, he said. Of course, I replied, my tone calm, too calm. He didn't notice. We climbed the stairs in silence, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the chipped paint and old carpet. Each step felt like walking deeper into a play where everyone already knew their lines, everyone except me, the one who was finally going off script. Barbara opened the door wearing her church dress, the purple one she saved for special occasions. Her perfume hit me first, too sweet, too heavy, like roses left too long in the sun. Dennis, she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. There's my birthday boy. She hugged him tightly, then looked at me, her smile cooling several degrees. "Janet, you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. My tone was smooth, almost kind. I think that frightened her more than anger would have. The apartment looked the same, floral wallpaper, family photos on every wall, not one of them including me. The table was set with Barbara's best china. A store-bought cake sat at the center, its frosting already sweating under the kitchen lights. Melissa and her husband were there, along with Kyle, beer in hand, wearing a new watch that gleamed under the light. I recognized it instantly. I'd seen the charge for it on our credit card bill, the one Dennis said was a client gift. I smiled at him. "Nice watch." He grinned, oblivious. "Yes, got a deal on it." "I bet you did." Dinner began the way it always did, with Barbara leading the conversation, steering it toward Anna as predictably as the tide. "Anna sent a card," she said, waving a pink envelope like a trophy. Even with her busy new position, she remembered my birthday, so thoughtful. She opened it dramatically and began to read. "Dearest Barbara, happy birthday to someone who's been like a second mother to me. Thank you for all your support during my difficult times. Love always, Anna." Barbara's voice trembled with satisfaction. "Isn't that sweet? That girl's got such a good heart." Across the table, Dennis's jaw tightened. Even he seemed uncomfortable now. "That's lovely," I said lightly, slicing into my pot roast, though it must have been expensive for her to send a card, what with all her debts. Barbara's fork paused midair. "Excuse me." "Oh, just something Dennis mentioned," I said, smiling. "You know about how she struggled after the boutique went under. I'm glad she's managing now. I guess the extra financial support helped." Dennis nearly choked on his wine. Barbara frowned. "Financial support." "Yes," I said, setting down my knife. "You know, the money Dennis sent her, from his trust fund." The table went still. Even Kyle stopped drinking. Barbara blinked rapidly, her lips parting. "His what?" Dennis's face had gone pale. "Janet," he said quietly. "Not now." "Oh, I think now is perfect," I replied. I reached into my purse and placed the folder on the table. The flap opened slightly, revealing a corner of the spreadsheet. "Do you want to know where your son's trust fund really came from?" I asked. Barbara's eyes darted between us. "Dennis?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any confession. I opened the folder. "Over the past 18 months, I've transferred $42,000 to Dennis's account. Every dollar labeled for your medical treatments, Robert's medication, home repairs. But only part of that money ever reached you." Barbara's lips trembled. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I said. I pulled out the first page. January $2, $400 for arthritis treatment. February $2, $300 for apartment repairs. March $2, $500 for Robert's medication. April. "Stop," she snapped. "We never received that money." "Exactly," I said softly. "You didn't, Anna did." The words hung in the air like smoke. Robert leaned forward, his face drained. "Dennis," he whispered, "is this true?" Dennis's voice cracked. "It's complicated." "No," I said. "It's arithmetic, and arithmetic doesn't lie." I turned the next page toward them, the spreadsheet. Neat columns of betrayal. "Operation Keep Anna Afloat," I read aloud. "Ring any bells?" Barbara looked genuinely lost for a moment. Then recognition flickered in her eyes, followed by something darker, shame or maybe fear. Kyle pushed his chair back. "Wait, what is this? You said the money came from consulting gigs." I met his eyes. "It didn't. You took $8,000 of it yourself for a motorcycle and some crypto nonsense." He opened his mouth, closed it again, his face flushing crimson. Barbara slammed her hand on the table. "You have no right to come into my home and—" I cut her off. "And expose your conspiracy." "Oh, Barbara, I have every right. You and your son lied, manipulated, and stole from me. You turned my kindness into your income." Her face hardened. "You don't understand. Dennis and Anna—" "Dennis and Anna what?" I snapped. "Belong together, that's your excuse for theft." Barbara's mask slipped then. The sweet, maternal smile vanished, replaced by the cold arrogance I'd seen flicker beneath it all these years. "You were never supposed to be permanent, Janet," she said. "You were convenient." The room went silent. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to fade. I felt the words like a physical blow, but I didn't flinch. "Convenient?" I repeated. "You mean the woman who paid your bills, your son's debts, and his ex's rent?" Barbara didn't answer. Dennis looked at me helplessly. "Janet, please, don't do this." "Oh, I'm just getting started." I laid the printed emails on the table one by one, like evidence in a courtroom. February 12th, I read. "Email from Barbara to Dennis. Tell Janet the roof is leaking. She won't verify with the landlord." I looked up. "How's the roof, Barbara? Still leaking?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. March 3rd, I continued. "Email from Dennis to Kyle. Mom says you need $8,000. Janet thinks it's for Dad's medication. Act accordingly if she asks." Robert's chair scraped the floor as he stood. His voice shook with fury. "You used my illness for money?" "Dad, please," Dennis started, but Robert's face had turned red. "You let me skip medication while you stole from your wife to pay your ex's bills?" Dennis's voice cracked. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" I said, my voice quiet now, colder. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like theft." For a moment, no one spoke. The truth had weight, heavy, undeniable, suffocating. I gathered the last few pages, the signatures Lisa had prepared. "Here's what's going to happen," I said evenly. "Dennis signs this acknowledgement of debt. Barbara and Robert sign affidavits confirming they never received the funds. Kyle documents every cent he took and agrees to repayment. You cooperate, and this stays a civil matter." Barbara's eyes widened. "And if we don't?" "Then I call my attorney," I said, sliding my phone from my purse. "And tomorrow morning, the FBI starts investigating wire fraud." Kyle blanched. "FBI? Wire fraud crosses state lines. It's federal. You'll have plenty of time to think about ethics from a prison cell." Dennis stared at me broken. "Janet, you're serious?" I looked him in the eyes that had once felt like home. Dead serious. He signed first. His hand trembled, his signature shaky. Barbara followed, her tears falling in silence, not remorseful tears, but angry ones. Kyle signed last, muttering under his breath. Robert was the only one who looked me in the eye. His voice was low, heavy. "I'm sorry, Janet, I didn't know." "I believe you," I said quietly, and I did. He looked like a man who just learned his house was built on stolen ground. I gathered the papers, slid them back into my folder, and stood. "Happy birthday, Barbara." Then I walked out, leaving behind the cake, the china, and the wreckage of their perfect little empire. Outside, the drizzle had turned into steady rain. I didn't run. I let it soak through my hair, down my face, washing away the last of the woman who'd once believed love was measured in patience and sacrifice. By the time I reached the car, I wasn't trembling anymore. I wasn't a wife, or a victim, or a fool. I was someone new. And for the first time in 18 months, I finally felt clean. Dennis didn't come home that night. His toothbrush was still by the sink, his jacket still hanging on the rack, but the space beside me in bed stayed cold. I didn't expect him to. Instead, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window, soft, rhythmic, almost comforting. I sat up, wrapped the blanket around me, and realized that I could breathe for the first time in months. It wasn't easy, but it was clean. When you live in deceit long enough, truth feels like oxygen and fire at once. It burns going in, but it keeps you alive. By noon, I was at Lisa's apartment again. She opened the door before I even knocked twice. "Well?" she asked, her eyes sharp but warm. "They all signed," I said simply. Lisa let out a low whistle. "You actually did it." I nodded and handed her the folder. She spread the papers across her dining table, eyes scanning each signature. "Good, very good. This gives us leverage. We'll file for divorce Monday morning. Civil suit for restitution next." Her tone was professional, but underneath it I could hear something else, admiration. I sat down heavily. "It's strange," I said. "It should feel like victory. It just feels quiet." Lisa smiled gently. "Justice rarely comes with applause, Janet. Usually it's just the sound of doors closing behind the wrong people." I thought about Barbara's face, frozen between rage and disbelief. Dennis's shaking hand signing his own confession. Kyle's fear when he realized this wasn't just family drama, it was federal crime. Yes, doors were closing, and I was finally on the right side of them. That evening, Dennis called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was low, tired, almost pleading. "Janet, please, I need to explain. We can fix this. I'll pay you back. Just don't destroy everything." I deleted the message. A few hours later, Barbara called. "You can't do this to us," she shouted before I could even speak. "Family doesn't drag family into court." I took a slow breath. "Family doesn't steal $42,000 either, Barbara." She started crying, loud, messy, performative. "You've ruined us." "No," I said quietly. "You ruined yourselves. I just stopped funding it." I hung up before she could answer. For a long moment, I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. My face looked different, not harder, but clearer. I'd spent so long trying to please people who only saw me as a resource. It felt unfamiliar to be someone who no longer needed their approval. Monday came gray and cold. At Hartford Financial, everything looked the same: spreadsheets, coffee cups, the hum of office life, but something inside me had shifted. Sarah brought me tea in my Tiffany mug, the one Dennis had bought for our anniversary. I ran my thumb over the silver rim and wondered how many lies that gift had already lived through. "Rough weekend?" she asked gently. "You could say that." She hesitated. "You okay?" "I will be," I said, and for once I believed it. That afternoon, Lisa texted, "Papers filed, it's official." I stared at the message, then at my name, Janet Whitmore. For years, that name had been attached to his, on mail, on checks, on Christmas cards. Now it belonged solely to me again. And somehow that felt like freedom. Dennis showed up that night. It was almost midnight when I heard the knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps, the kind of knock that said, "I still think I belong here." Lisa had offered to stay with me for a few nights just in case. She was asleep on the couch when I opened the door, but she stirred at the sound of his voice. "Janet," he said, his eyes red, his hair unkempt. "Please, just talk to me. You shouldn't be here. I need to explain. It wasn't supposed to go that far." Lisa stood behind me, arms crossed. "You can explain to her lawyer." "Oh, wait, that's me." Dennis blinked, caught off guard. "You're Lisa Brennan," she said crisply, "and you're trespassing." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice breaking. "Janet, I loved you." I met his eyes. "You loved my money, Dennis, that's different." He flinched like I'd slapped him. For a long second, he said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged. "I signed everything. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said softly. "Signing papers doesn't undo the lies, it just records them." He looked around the living room, at the photos I'd already started taking off the walls, the empty spot where our wedding picture used to hang. "This was our home," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "It was a stage, and the play's over." Lisa stepped forward, her tone cool. "You need to leave, Mr. Whitmore." He hesitated at the doorway. "You'll regret this," he murmured. I looked him straight in the eye. "I already regret every minute I believed in you." He left without another word. The door clicked shut, and the sound echoed like an exorcism. Days turned into weeks. Word spread through the office, not the details, just that I was divorcing Dennis. The sympathy in my coworkers' eyes was gentle, not pitying. My boss, Margaret, called me in one morning. "I heard about your situation," she said carefully. "If you need time off—" "No," I interrupted. "I need to work." Margaret studied me, then nodded. "There's a senior partner position opening soon. I wasn't going to mention it yet, but maybe this is your time." For the first time in months, I smiled, not politely, not for show, but genuinely. Maybe it was my time. 2 weeks later, Dennis's retirement account transfer appeared in my bank, $30,000, partial repayment per agreement. It was the cleanest money I'd ever received. I stared at the transaction, then closed my laptop. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about reclaiming my sense of worth, something they'd tried to price, manipulate, and steal. Kyle texted once, "You ruined everything." I replied, "No, I just added up the numbers." Then I blocked him. Barbara left 3 voicemails in one day, shifting from begging to threats to sobbing. I saved them all evidence just in case, but I never listened twice. Some people apologize to survive. Barbara apologized to manipulate, and I was done being her audience. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I came home from work to find a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter on lined paper. "Dear Janet, there aren't enough words for what I need to say, but I'll try. I didn't know what they were doing. I should have. I let my pride blind me. You deserved better from all of us, especially from me. I can't fix what they took from you, but I can promise this. You opened my eyes. I've left Barbara. I'm staying with my brother in New Jersey. I've started getting help for my heart condition through the programs you told me about. Thank you for that. I wish you peace, truly. Robert Whitmore." I read it twice. His handwriting shook, but the words were steady. Honest. For the first time, I felt something close to forgiveness, not for Dennis, not for Barbara, but for Robert, who'd been just another victim of their greed. I placed the letter on my refrigerator and pinned it with a sunflower magnet, not as a reminder of pain. That night I sat by the window, a cup of tea in hand, watching the city lights shimmer through the rain. The past felt distant, like a photograph fading at the edges. I wasn't the same woman who'd once believed patience could fix everything. I was someone who'd learned that love without honesty isn't love, it's leverage. And in the quiet, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel cold. There's a peculiar clarity that comes after betrayal, a kind of sharpened sight. You start to notice everything. The cracks in people's smiles, the hesitation in their voices, the way they choose their words like they're walking through a minefield. Once you've lived in deception, truth becomes your second skin. That's who I was becoming, the woman who no longer doubted her instincts. The woman who knew too much. It had been nearly a month since the confrontation. The legal filings were moving forward. Dennis had gone quiet, his calls reduced to short, pathetic attempts at civility. Barbara had stopped calling entirely, though occasionally she'd leave voicemails that began with, "I just want to talk," and ended with, "You'll regret this, Janet." I never returned a single one. Work had become my refuge. At Hartford Financial, everything made sense, numbers lined up, cause led to effect, logic ruled where emotion had once failed me. It was almost funny in a tragic way that my professional skill detecting fraud had finally saved my personal life. I'd become more focused than ever, almost surgical in my efficiency. Clients praised me. Colleagues admired me. Margaret, my boss, stopped by one afternoon and said, "You're glowing, Janet. Whatever storm you went through, you came out shining." I smiled faintly. Maybe storms wash off what doesn't belong. Yet, for all my newfound peace, something about the entire ordeal still itched at the back of my mind. It wasn't just the theft, it was the why. Why had Dennis kept Anna in his life after all these years? Why had Barbara been so sure that he'd return to her? And most of all, why had Anna accepted the money without question? The pieces didn't fit together. I had the facts, but not the full story. And for someone like me, partial truths were just unfinished equations, so I decided to finish them. On a quiet Friday afternoon, I found Anna's boutique listed online, shuttered now, but her name still attached to a few charity events and volunteer programs. I hesitated for a moment, then sent an email. "Hi, Anna, this is Janet Whitmore. I think we should talk, it's about Dennis." She replied within an hour. "Janet, I was wondering when you'd reach out. You deserve the truth. Coffee, tomorrow, 11 a.m. Her tone was polite, careful, but there was an undertone I recognized. Guilt wrapped in dignity. The cafe was small and warm, with soft jazz playing in the background. Anna arrived first, petite, poised, with the kind of beauty that had probably charmed Barbara all those years ago. Her hair was shorter now, her smile guarded. "Janet," she said as I approached, "you look exactly like I imagined, composed, smart, impossible to fool." "I wasn't always," I said, sitting down across from her. We ordered coffee, and for a few moments neither of us spoke. It was strange, two women bound by the same man, sitting across from each other like mirror images of pain and hindsight. Finally, Anna broke the silence. "You know, when Dennis first told me about you, he said you were the one who saved him." I let out a dry laugh. "From what?" "From himself," she said quietly. "But that was a lie, too." I leaned forward. "You knew about the money." She nodded slowly. "Eventually, yes, but I didn't know it was yours. He told me it came from his grandmother's trust fund. Said he was helping me because he wanted to see me get back on my feet." "And you believed him?" Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw something painfully familiar: shame. "I wanted to. I was desperate. The boutique was failing, and Dennis, he made it sound like charity, not pity. He said it was his way of repaying karma." I took a slow sip of coffee. "So when did you find out the truth?" "When you emailed me," she said. "The documents you sent, the spreadsheet, the emails, I couldn't believe it at first. Then I checked my bank records. The timing matched exactly." She looked down at her cup. "I've already returned what I could, 12,000, wired directly to your restitution account. I can testify if you need me to." Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "I appreciate that," I said softly, "but I didn't come here for revenge. I came here for understanding." Anna gave a small, bitter smile. "Then you came to the right place, because I understand Dennis better than anyone, and that's not something to envy." For the next hour, she told me everything. The lies had started early in their relationship, small at first, then constant. He told her he was building a startup that never existed. Claimed he was covering debts for friends who, in reality, were just names on his fabricated invoices. When the boutique began failing, he promised to help her, just as he'd later promised to help his parents. And when he couldn't sustain the illusion, he found a new savior, me. "He's addicted to rescue," Anna said, her voice distant. "He doesn't want love, he wants admiration. He builds disasters just so he can be the hero." "And Barbara?" I asked. Anna's smile faded. "Barbara made him that way. She never taught him that love without control could exist. She taught him that affection was a transaction." Her words hit me like a quiet revelation. It wasn't just Dennis. It was the entire family, a dynasty of emotional debt collectors, each one trying to buy affection with lies. Anna sighed. "You know, for years I thought I ruined him, but he was already broken. You just didn't see it because you thought you could fix it." I swallowed hard. "You sound like my therapist." She laughed softly. "Maybe we've both become our own therapists." When we stood to leave, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you saved yourself. And maybe, in a strange way, you saved me too." We walked out into the afternoon light, two women who'd survived the same man in different decades of our lives. The air was crisp, almost forgiving. For the first time, I didn't feel like the wronged wife or the victim of a con. I felt like a witness, not just to what they'd done to me, but to how I'd allowed it. That night, I sat in my living room, the evidence folder now tucked away in a drawer. I didn't need to look at it anymore. The numbers had served their purpose. They'd told the story I needed to hear. Instead, financial red flags in relationships. It started as a list: secrecy around money, unexplained transfers, sudden guilt trips tied to finances, love that always needs a receipt. By midnight, I had written 10 pages. By the next morning, I'd created a title, Receipt Keepers. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for every woman who'd ever been told she was crazy for asking, "Where's the money going?" Weeks later, the online group had grown from a handful of members to hundreds. Stories poured in, women who'd been tricked by boyfriends, parents, even their own children. Some were still trapped, others were on the verge of breaking free. Every story echoed my own in some way. Every name could have been mine. And as I read their words, I realized something. My pain had been expensive, but not wasted. It had bought wisdom, and with it, the power to prevent others from paying the same price. Late one evening, I received a message from an unfamiliar email. Subject: Thank you. Janet, I read about receipt keepers. You're doing something important. I'm proud of you. Anna, I smiled. For the first time, her name didn't sting. It just felt like closure. I stood by my window again, the city lights flickering like tiny heartbeats below. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who equated love with sacrifice, who mistook manipulation for devotion. She was gone now, replaced by someone who understood that love should never require you to audit your own life. Outside, the rain began again, soft, cleansing. I turned off the lights, stood in the glow of the street lamps, and whispered to the quiet room. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. Because the truth, at last, was mine. There's something sacred about starting over, not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet, deliberate act of rebuilding a life piece by piece. It doesn't come with fireworks or applause. It comes with long mornings, unfamiliar silence, and small, steady choices that whisper, "You survived. Now what?" That was where I found myself, in the long middle between what had ended and what hadn't begun yet. It started with boxes. Stacks of them in my living room, labeled in neat handwriting, "Donate," "Keep," "Forget." The forget pile grew faster than I expected. Old photographs, love letters written in Dennis's looping script, kitchen utensils we'd picked together from a wedding registry that now felt like a catalog of illusions. I thought getting rid of things would hurt, but it didn't. It was liberating. Every item that left the house made the air feel lighter, as if I was slowly unpacking the weight of deception. When I came across the Tiffany mug Dennis had given me, the one Sarah used to refill with green tea at work, I paused. For a moment, the old warmth tugged at me. Then I wrapped it in newspaper and dropped it into the forget box. Not everything beautiful deserves to stay. The new apartment was smaller, but the walls were mine. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream about confrontation or betrayal. I dreamed about sunlight, endless, warm, and quiet. I painted the walls a soft blue, hung linen curtains that fluttered with every breeze, and filled the kitchen shelves with mismatched mugs I'd collected from thrift stores. Imperfect things, but honest ones. Lisa helped me move in, wearing jeans and an old college sweatshirt. "You know," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead, "this place has good energy, like a reset button." I smiled. That's exactly what it is. We stood by the window, watching the city stretch out below. Somewhere down there, Barbara was probably yelling at a cable company representative. Kyle was complaining about night shifts, and Dennis was probably spinning another story to someone new. For once, it didn't matter. Their chaos no longer reached me. Work blossomed. Receipt Keepers had grown from an online support group to something tangible, a nonprofit organization with a clear mission, teaching women how to recognize financial abuse and reclaim autonomy. Anna joined as co-founder. It surprised me at first, but the partnership worked. She had warmth, I had structure. Together, we built something balanced, compassion, and logic, side by side. Our first workshop drew 30 women. They came with notebooks, questions, and faces that mirrored the same quiet determination I'd once seen in my own reflection. We taught them how to track joint accounts, recognize manipulation disguised as generosity, and document financial inconsistencies without tipping off their partners. It wasn't about revenge, it was about recovery. One woman, a teacher named Beth, approached me after the session. Her eyes glistened with exhaustion and gratitude. "You saved me," she whispered. I shook my head. "You saved yourself, I just handed you a flashlight." At Hartford, Margaret called me into her office one morning. She poured 2 cups of coffee, always a good sign. "Janet," she said, "I've been watching how you've handled everything. You've turned crisis into clarity. That's leadership." She slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was the official offer letter, senior partner. I stared at it, the words blurring slightly as emotion rose. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Margaret said simply. "And take the weekend off, you've earned it." I left her office with the envelope pressed to my chest. For so long, my success had been something I'd shared with Dennis. Every promotion, every bonus, every celebration diluted by his ego. This time it was mine. Fully, purely, beautifully mine. Saturday morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across my new kitchen. I brewed coffee, strong, dark, unshared, and sat by the window with my notebook. It had become a ritual, writing one truth about myself each morning. Day 1, I am not a victim. Day 10, I am worth my own loyalty. Day 31, peace is not loneliness. That morning, I wrote, "Rebuilding isn't about replacing what you lost. It's about discovering what you never had before." The words felt right. They felt like a home. Around noon, my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Hi, Janet, this is Robert. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I just wanted you to know I'm doing well. The programs you helped me apply for are covering my medication. Thank you again. You didn't have to help, but you did." A photo followed, Robert in a small garden, sunlight falling across his face as he held a potted plant. His smile was tired, but real. For a moment, I felt something soft break inside me, not sadness, but forgiveness finding its way through the cracks. Some wounds don't heal by forgetting. They heal when you decide to remember differently. That evening, I hosted a small dinner in my new apartment, just Lisa and Anna. We sat on the floor, eating takeout Thai food from paper boxes, laughing about how adulthood is just learning to find joy in simplicity. "You know," Lisa said, raising her glass, "this is the best revenge story I've ever witnessed. You didn't destroy them, you outgrew them." Anna smiled. "You built something out of the ashes. Not many people can do that." I looked around my little apartment, the candles flickering, the hum of the city outside, the 2 women beside me who'd walked through the same fire. Maybe they were right. Revenge hadn't been about punishment. It had been about transformation. Later that night, after the laughter faded and the dishes were done, I sat on the balcony, watching rain clouds roll in. The city shimmered under the streetlights, alive and indifferent. I thought about how easily life could collapse, how everything I'd built once had fallen apart in a single night, and how, somehow, I'd built something better from its remains. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happy ending written in glittering letters. But there was peace. There was purpose. And maybe that was better. The first drops of rain began to fall, tapping gently against the railing. I tilted my face upward, letting the cool water touch my skin. Once, rain had felt like grief, heavy, cold, a reminder of everything that had been lost. Now it felt like renewal. Inside, my phone buzzed with a new notification, another message in the receipt keeper's forum. "I finally left him today. I don't have much, but I have peace. Thank you, Janet, for helping me see the numbers clearly." I smiled and typed back, "You were never powerless. You just forgot how strong you were." Then I set the phone down, curled up in my chair, and listened to the rain. Outside, the city glowed. Inside, my heart finally did too. Freedom, I've learned, doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't kick down your door or announce itself with applause. It creeps in quietly, like morning light slipping through the blinds, soft, patient, and undeniable. And before you even notice, it fills the whole room. That was my life now, a room filled with quiet freedom. But freedom, I was beginning to realize, isn't just the absence of chains. It's learning to live without them, to stop listening for the sounds of the locks that used to rattle in your mind. The months after moving into my new apartment unfolded like chapters of a different book, one I'd finally started writing for myself. I woke up early now, not out of anxiety, but habit. Mornings were mine again, sunlight spilling over my desk, a cup of coffee that didn't go cold while waiting for someone else to wake up. Work thrived. Receipt keepers had grown faster than I dared to imagine. We were no longer just an online support group. We had partnerships with local women's centers, financial literacy programs, even community colleges that wanted us to speak about economic abuse, a term that still shocked people when they heard it. One afternoon, as I finished reviewing the nonprofit's first annual report, Anna called. "You sitting down?" she asked, her voice vibrating with excitement. "I am now," I said, smiling. "CNN wants to feature us. A full segment, women reclaiming their financial power." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. They said our story is empowering and necessary." I laughed, a real laugh, not the brittle one I used to fake during Barbara's family dinners. "Look at us," I said. "Two women who survived the same storm, now building a lighthouse." Anna chuckled softly. Maybe that's what we were meant for all along. The week leading up to the interview was a blur. The producer called it a feature on resilience, but I knew it was more than that. It was a story about survival, about women who'd turned manipulation into movement. When the day came, the studio lights were blinding. The interviewer was kind, her tone gentle but firm. "So, Janet," she said, "you've spoken openly about financial betrayal in marriage. What would you say to someone who's in the same situation you were?" I looked straight into the camera, into the eyes of women I'd never met but somehow knew. "I'd tell her that love isn't supposed to cost her safety," I said. "If you're constantly justifying someone else's behavior while your spirit or your bank account keeps shrinking, that's not love. That's dependency disguised as devotion." The interviewer nodded. "You've built something remarkable out of your pain. How did you find the strength?" "I didn't," I replied. "I built it, piece by piece. And then one day, I realized the woman who'd been destroyed was also the woman who could rebuild." When the segment aired, my phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Messages flooded in, emails, texts, even handwritten letters. Women from all over the country, from Seattle to Atlanta, reached out to share their own stories, their own reckonings. And somewhere in all that noise, I realized something profound. Freedom echoes. When one woman escapes, others start listening for the sound. A few weeks later, I received a letter that stopped me in my tracks. The handwriting was familiar, stiff, but neat. "Barbara, Janet, you won't believe this, but I've been thinking about everything. About how blind I was. About how much I let pride destroy. Dennis isn't doing well. He's lost his job, can't find steady work. Kyle moved away. The apartment feels so quiet now. I can't sleep at night. Sometimes I wish I could go back and undo it all. I know you don't owe me forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I see it now. You were the only one who ever actually cared about this family." "Barbara," I read the letter twice. It didn't feel manipulative this time. It felt defeated, the tone of someone who finally realized the empire she built was made of sand. I didn't write back. Some things don't require a response. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes, it's just choosing not to carry the weight anymore. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in the same drawer as Robert's, two relics of a life that no longer belonged to me. One crisp autumn evening, I decided to walk to the community center where we hosted our weekly workshops. The leaves had turned gold, spinning down from the trees in lazy spirals. The air smelled like rain and possibility. Inside, the room buzzed with soft chatter. Lisa was there, standing by a whiteboard, laughing with one of the new volunteers. Anna waved from the front of the room. I stood for a moment, just watching the women, the energy, the life. I'd spent so long associating power with control, wealth, and image. Now I saw it differently. Power looked like this, shared, gentle, multiplied through compassion. During the Q&A, one woman raised her hand. She looked nervous, maybe mid-30s, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "Janet," she said quietly, "how do you know when it's really over, when you can stop fighting?" I thought about her question for a long moment before answering. "When peace stops feeling like punishment," I said. "That's when it's over." The room went still. Then she nodded, tears in her eyes, and I realized I wasn't just teaching anymore, I was witnessing transformations. That night after the session, Anna and I walked out together. "You ever think about him?" she asked gently. "Dennis?" She nodded. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But not in the way you think. I don't miss him. I just wonder how someone could look at love and see something to exploit." Anna sighed. "He doesn't even understand love. To him, it's a currency." "Then I guess I went bankrupt in the right market," I said with a faint smile. She laughed, and the sound carried down the empty street like the soft echo of closure. Later, at home, I sat by the window, the same spot where I'd once stared at the rain, broken and lost. But this time, I wasn't looking for meaning. I was simply content. The city lights shimmered, reflections of lives happening, hearts healing, people trying again. I thought about Barbara's letter, Robert's garden, Kyle somewhere out there learning humility, and Dennis, a man who'd once thought he could buy love and ended up selling his soul instead. They were ghosts now, and I was no longer haunted. My phone buzzed. Another message, this time from a woman named Claire. "I just left. I used the template from your workshop. I finally did it." "Thank you, Janet," I smiled. Freedom had found another voice, another echo. I typed back, "Keep your receipts, Claire, but more importantly, keep yourself." Then I set my phone down, turned off the lights, and let the quiet fill the room. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of peace, of purpose, of echoes that belonged to no one but me. Some mornings feel like forgiveness. Not the kind you give to someone else, but the kind you quietly grant yourself. The forgiveness for staying too long, for believing too much, for mistaking endurance for love. That's what this new season felt like to me. Forgiveness in sunlight form. It had been nearly a year since the night I walked out of Barbara's apartment. 12 months since I'd watched my old life collapse under the weight of its own lies, and somehow, from that wreckage, I'd built something far more real. Receipt Keepers was no longer a quiet initiative whispered about in online forums. We had offices now, two, in fact, one in Brooklyn and another in Chicago. What had begun as a shared trauma between Anna and me had turned into a movement. Every week, new volunteers joined. Every month, more women walked through our doors carrying stories, different details, same patterns. Money siphoned under the guise of love. Dreams turned into debts. Affection twisted into control. But now, for each of those stories, there was a counter-story, a woman who walked away, found herself, rebuilt. We kept their names anonymous, but their voices became our chorus. They were the sound of freedom learning to sing again. The day the CNN segment won a regional journalism award, Anna insisted on hosting a small celebration at my apartment. She arrived with wine and a bouquet of sunflowers, the same kind Robert had once sent in his Christmas card. "Your signature flower," she said, smiling. Strong, bright, unapologetic. Lisa came too, balancing takeout boxes and her ever-present laptop. "I swear," she said, "if anyone deserves national attention, it's you too. You turned pain into infrastructure." We laughed, toasted to survival, and shared stories from the women we'd met, each one more courageous than the last. Halfway through dinner, Anna looked at me thoughtfully. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. I took a sip of wine, considering. "You mean for the organization?" "I mean for you," she said gently. You've built this incredible foundation, but who is Janet beyond the rebuilding? The question landed softly but deep. Who was I now that I wasn't surviving? I didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time, the not knowing didn't scare me. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail, no return address, postmarked from New Jersey. Inside was a short note written in careful, shaky script. Janet, I wanted you to know Barbara passed away last week, peacefully in her sleep. Her health had declined, and she'd been in and out of the hospital for months. I thought you deserved to hear it from me, not a headline or rumor. She asked about you near the end, said you were right about everything. Robert, I sat for a long time, staring at the letter. My first feeling wasn't anger or satisfaction, or even sorrow. It was stillness. Barbara had spent her life controlling others, manipulating affection like a currency she could hoard. And in the end, all that control had slipped quietly from her hands. Maybe, I thought, that was its own kind of justice, not punishment, but truth, because truth has a way of outliving everything that hides from it. I lit a candle on my windowsill that night, not for mourning, but for release. Some ghosts don't need to be banished, they just need to be let go. Spring came early that year, soft rain, pale light, the first green shoots pushing through the gray city soil. For months, I'd buried myself in work, in structure, in purpose. But now, with the cold fading, something in me wanted more than survival. It started small. I joined a pottery class at the community center, where the air always smelled faintly of clay and chamomile tea. My hands, once accustomed to spreadsheets and ink, learned the rhythm of shaping something tangible. There's something healing about creation, the way raw material resists at first, then yields, becoming what you ask of it with enough patience. Some days my bowls were uneven, my vases lopsided, but they were mine, perfect in their imperfection. One evening after class, I walked home through the park. The sky was a bruised shade of purple, the kind that only appears before rain. I passed couples holding hands, kids chasing pigeons, an old man feeding ducks by the pond. For once, I didn't feel like an outsider to love, I just felt like someone who understood its weight better than most. At the edge of the path, a man stopped to tie his shoelace. When he looked up, our eyes met briefly. He smiled, not the kind of smile that demanded something, but the kind that simply said hello. "Rain's coming," he said. "Seems like it always does," I replied, smiling back. He laughed softly. "At least it keeps the city honest." We walked together for a few minutes, trading small talk, whether coffee shops, the strange comfort of city noise. His name was Michael, a teacher who worked at a nearby school. There was no spark of romance, not yet, just something easy, the kind of ease that used to feel impossible. When we reached the corner where our paths split, he said, "You walk this way often?" "Lately, yes," I said. "Well," he said, smiling again, "maybe I'll see you next time." "Maybe," I replied, and I meant it. That night I didn't overthink it. I didn't analyze tone or meaning or motive. I just felt the simplicity of a conversation untainted by deceit, and it was enough. I opened my journal and wrote, "Freedom is not just leaving the cage. It's learning how to stop fearing the open sky." In the following months, Michael and I did see each other again, at the park, then at the coffee shop. Then one evening at a poetry reading, Lisa insisted we all attend. It was slow, unhurried, grounded. No confessions, no performances, no grand promises, just small moments that felt real. One night, as we walked along the waterfront, he said, "You've been through something heavy, haven't you?" I nodded. "Yes, but I came out lighter." He didn't pry. He just smiled that same quiet smile and said, "Then maybe that's why you shine like you do now." I didn't answer, but the truth lingered in the space between us like warmth, not the burning kind, but the steady kind that stays. A year to the day after Barbara's birthday dinner, I stood on a stage at a financial ethics conference in Manhattan, giving a keynote titled "The Cost of Silence: When Love Becomes a Transaction." As I spoke, I looked out at the crowd, faces intent, pens moving, people listening not just with their ears but with their hearts. When I finished, they rose to their feet, not for me but for the message, for the truth that had finally found its voice. Afterward, I walked out into the spring air. The sky was golden, the city alive. Michael was waiting outside, leaning against a lamppost, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. "Thought you might want these," he said. I laughed. "You remembered. How could I forget they're your signature?" He handed them to me, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone who had survived a tragedy. I felt like someone who had lived through a transformation. As we walked home, hand in hand, I thought about how far I'd come from the night of that cruel birthday sneer to this moment under the city lights. Barbara had said I'd never be as good as Anna. She'd been right. I wasn't as good. I was better. I was free. And the light had finally returned, not the blinding light of fantasy, but the steady glow of truth. There's a moment, sometime after the pain fades, but before the next chapter fully begins, when you realize you're no longer the same person who once begged the universe to go back to how things used to be. You don't want the old life anymore. You want the one you built from its ashes. That realization is the quiet miracle of survival, not the return to who you were, but the arrival of who you were meant to become. It had been 2 years since the night Barbara sneered across her birthday cake and told me I'd never be as good as Anna. 2 years since the walls of my marriage came crashing down. And 2 years since I walked away from the Whitmores, from their manipulations, from the lies, from the version of myself who believed that love meant fixing people who refused to heal. Now, my life felt like a book rewritten from the margins. Receipt Keepers had gone national. We'd been featured on Good Morning America, and our first book, The Invisible Theft, How Financial Control Destroys Love, was being published by a major New York house. Anna and I co-authored it, alternating chapters, her voice poetic, mine methodical. It read like a manifesto and a memoir, and in some way it was both. The morning the printed proofs arrived, I sat at my kitchen table, tracing my name on the cover. Janet Whitmore. It no longer felt like a name connected to him, it felt like a brand of strength. Lisa came by later that afternoon, a bottle of champagne tucked under her arm. To survival, she toasted, and to best-selling revenge stories. I laughed. Let's not call it revenge, let's call it restoration. Fair enough, she said. Though I still think it's poetic justice that your story, the one he tried to bury under deceit, is now the one the world's buying by the thousands. Poetic justice, I thought. Yes, exactly that. Michael was in my life now, gently, steadily, like sunlight through morning curtains. He never asked about Dennis unless I brought it up, and when I did, he listened without judgment. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed solid, kind, and completely unbothered by the fact that I sometimes needed silence more than company. We'd been together for nearly a year. No secrets, no joint accounts, no illusions, just honesty, and that was enough. One Sunday morning, as we shared pancakes and coffee on my balcony, he said, "You ever think you'll marry again?" I smiled, not out of avoidance, but thought. I used to think marriage was the proof of love. Now I know love doesn't need paperwork to be real. He nodded, accepting that with the quiet ease that had drawn me to him in the first place. "Still," he said, "if you ever change your mind, I make decent pancakes." I laughed, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "You're already halfway there, then." Later that day, I visited the old neighborhood, the one I'd avoided for nearly 2 years. Queens looked the same, but I didn't. The brick buildings, the cracked sidewalks, the corner bodega that still sold flowers by the door, all of it felt smaller somehow, like a set from a play I'd long since finished performing in. I found myself standing in front of Barbara and Robert's old apartment building. The windows were different now, new curtains, new tenants, no trace of lavender air freshener or family photographs crowding the walls. For a moment, I wondered if Barbara's spirit still lingered there, replaying her final act of control in that dining room. But then I caught my reflection in the glass door, calm, composed, no tremor in my hands. The ghost wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. And in that moment, I let it go. That evening, I met Anna for dinner downtown. She just started seeing someone new, a teacher, kind and soft-spoken, the sort of man who asked questions and actually listened to the answers. Over pasta and wine, she said, "Do you ever think we needed Dennis to become who we are now?" I tilted my head, considering. Maybe not Dennis himself, but the fire he lit. Sometimes destruction is the only language change understands. Anna smiled. "I'll drink to that." We clinked glasses, not to the past, but to everything it had taught us. Before we parted, she handed me a letter. "From Robert," she said. "He sent it to our office. Thought you'd want to read it." At home, I opened it carefully. "Dear Janet, you once told me that family doesn't steal from family." I've repeated that line to myself many times these past months. You were right. I've spent my life confusing love with loyalty to the wrong people for the wrong reasons. But I've learned something since Barbara's passing. True loyalty starts with honesty. Thank you for showing me that truth, even when it hurt. I'm living quietly now, growing tomatoes in my brother's backyard. It's not much, but it's peaceful. And peace, I've learned, is the highest form of wealth. Robert, I smiled through tears. He had found his peace, too, and maybe that was all any of us ever wanted, not victory, not revenge, just a place to set down the weight we'd carried too long. That night, I stood by my window again, the same one that had watched me cry, rebuild, and rise. The city lights shimmered like 1,000 small affirmations, and in their glow, I whispered to the woman I used to be. You did it, you got out, you came home to yourself. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was grace. Grace for every version of me that had tried to love, to fix, to forgive too much. Grace for the woman who had once believed she was powerless. Grace for the one who'd finally learned she wasn't. Months later, The Invisible Theft hit the bestseller list. Receipt Keepers opened a scholarship fund for women starting over after financial abuse. I taught my first university seminar on ethics, empathy, and economics. And one evening, standing on stage at a women's leadership summit, I said something that felt like the truest sentence I'd ever spoken. Sometimes, the greatest investment you can make isn't in stocks or real estate or even other people. It's in reclaiming the parts of yourself that you let others spend for too long. The crowd rose to their feet, but I wasn't thinking about applause. I was thinking about a woman named Janet, 2 years ago, sitting at a dinner table surrounded by betrayal and standing up finally to say, "Then tell Anna to pay your bills." That single sentence had rewritten everything: my life, my purpose, my future. After the summit, Michael met me outside the venue. He held out his hand and said, "Ready to go home?" I took it, smiling. I already am. We walked into the city night, a city that had once witnessed my heartbreak and now shimmered with my rebirth. Above us, the sky stretched wide and endless. The past was behind me, the light had returned, and the woman who once lost everything had finally gained herself. There are 2 kinds of endings in life, the ones that close and the ones that open. The first feel like loss. The second feel like truth. Mine was both. Because the truth is, I didn't just rebuild my life. I rewrote it, one receipt, one realization, one act of courage at a time, and that's the real story. Not the betrayal, but the becoming.